When you're ready to begin, please do.
Okay, well, first of all, let me apologize for not being able to be with you today, but as you heard, Valerie Amos asked me to stay behind for a variety of reasons, so I had to oblige. But I'm really happy that the video conference worked out. And first of all, Wendy, thank you very much for your presentation, which was also very illuminating to us. As you know, this subject has been for the past 2 years very, very high on our agenda. The last two reports of the Secretary General to the General Assembly, basically, on sort of our annual reports on humanitarian coordination, featured in essentially these security and access issues as one of their two topics. And I think last year, Abby was actually a member of the panel. No, this year, Abby was actually a member of the panel of the discussion on this. So I think the work that you do and GPR8 knowledge and information in various forms has actually found its way into our daily work. And I wanted to congratulate you on this update. It's a great report, and many of the findings will inform our work daily in the field. Perhaps just what I would like to focus on is a little bit the work that we're doing, and which I think will partly integrate some of your findings, but also bring some new, or shed some new light on how to deal with humanitarian assistance, or how to retain the ability to deliver humanitarian assistance in what we call high-risk environments. We've commissioned a study, and obviously Abby and Adil, who've worked on the GPR8, are the main researchers for our study, and which is headed by, and the team is headed by Jan Egeland. We also have an advisory group around the study, which is very, impressive, which has Karen Abu Zaid and Ramiro Lopez da Silva, Tom Koenigs, former SRSG, Ross Mountain, and many, many other practitioners that I've probably right now forgotten. And the reason is that we think the findings coming out of this study, there needs to be some political follow-up within the United Nations. And hence Jan will certainly lend his voice to this. And that's the next step. So we do not only produce this study, but we think this will be a 1 or 2 year process. We will not succeed at all ends, but we want to take this to the Secretary General, to our Department for Political Affairs. Our colleagues from the Department for Safety and Security are actually part of the advisory group, because we need to bring them into this conversation. And the intent behind our study was actually that 2 years back, I had a discussion with our humanitarian coordinator in Somalia, and he said, you know what, we're now having these experiences with remote controlled operations, and we're doing this now less and that a little bit more, and sort of the toe dipping, flying in, staying for a day, pulling back, and if that goes well, the next time you stay a little longer. And then some of the NGOs don't even advertise anymore where they're going and what they're going to deliver. So all these little measures. And I said, it's in a way a pity that he and I were just having this discussion at the same time as in some other field situations. Probably people are struggling with the very same issues and concerns. And so part of, and it's a deficiency of the system, that what I call the horizontal communication between field stations isn't working very well. So part of our ambition initially was just to say, why don't we go to 6 or 7 and look at some of the past experiences that we've had, so altogether 10 or 12 situations, and say what good, not necessarily best, but what good or appropriate practices have been developed in those contexts, and what did work, what didn't work, and the reasons why it didn't work may have been very specific to that context, and it could still work in some other place. But really, we wanted to inform this this horizontal discussion among field stations so that they can see, aha, this is what they did, and it actually worked very well, and they dismissed the following things for the following reasons, so we don't have to go through that same experience anymore. And already we held a roundtable with all relevant humanitarian coordinators and deputy SRSGs at the beginning of this year, and some of them were exhilarated because they said, well, that's exactly what the discussion that we're just right now going through. So that's just a little bit by way of background of the study. Our entry point is similar to you. We also look at the security triangle, but we very deliberately actually wanted to take a step back and say, what is it actually that humanitarians that adds value to humanitarian action? It is really our presence, and very often it's the NGOs as opposed to UN organizations, the NGOs who are in the very deep field with communities where they do deliver the assistance that is required, and where they are in touch with local communities and discern their problems. But all of this means, if you want to add that value, you have to be present in the deep field. You cannot do this from another location across the border. And if that's the starting point, then the next step is, well, in order to get there, you also need to gain the trust and the confidence with those communities. And in order to do this, the term that's been coined is acceptance. We need to work on acceptance. That's a process. That's not an event. That's a process. You know, it doesn't happen by showing up once, and it sometimes requires quite a long time. So our entry point into the entire discussion was actually to say, what are we doing, what more can we do, and where do we need to return to this paradigm of soliciting and creating, establishing acceptance. And for us, this doesn't mean that acceptance would ever or could ever, particularly in these very risky environments, replace or substitute for security. But for us, security measures are actually complementing what we're trying to do in reaching out and establishing this rapport with communities. So for us, the central term, in a way, in this broader risk management world that we live in, the central paradigm for us is actually acceptance, and everything else complements that. And that is quite a turnaround from the discussion as it has unfolded within the United Nations, but in some ways also in some of our circles, where we've really been so focused on security measures and phases and all of this, that we lost a little bit sight sometimes of what we're actually trying to achieve, which is our ability to deliver on our primary mandates, which is to bring humanitarian assistance to people in need. And every other purpose is secondary. And I've said this just a few days ago at a bigger meeting here in New York. The purpose of stabilization or peace building, all of these things, counterinsurgency, they may all be in their own right understandable or acceptable goals, but it's just not the primary goal for humanitarians to be the main contributor to peace stabilization. So we need to look at everything that affects our ability to reach out to communities, to build that trust, to build that confidence, and that's a little bit the background, the entry point to our study. The second point I would like to emphasize is obviously, the praise goes to you and the work that you've been doing through the GPRA process in highlighting that there has been a dramatic shift. I mean, Jan Egeland, in his very own way, called this humanitarianism being under attack, having been under attack now for a decade or so. And if we look at the figures that have come out, is over 100 workers killed every year since 2008, which is 3 times the number of humanitarian workers that got killed a decade ago. And if you look at the main context where they actually got killed, it is those very political and politicized contexts like Afghanistan, Somalia, Sudan, Darfur, Pakistan, and even Chad. So obviously, this suggests at least that the political context, I'm not saying politicization, because all these contexts are political for the reasons that they are political. But the more political a context is, the more dangerous it gets for humanitarian work. And that is certainly something that our humanitarian coordinator colleagues in Afghanistan and so on have highlighted. So for us, the conundrum, in a way, the challenge is, how can we, in our discussions with our security colleagues, our political colleagues, and all those who say, well, we all need to hunker down in one bunker, in a way, in one compound, humanitarians and political and peacekeepers together to, in a way, survive. How can we argue against that? How can we tell them that we actually have a set of very good experiences and lessons for why this is the wrong thing to do, for why we can actually create or contribute at least to our own security, our own secure environment, by building that acceptance, by taking that patience. And part of this is also to work much broader than just from an operational point of view between agencies and security providers or security people, to also look at donors and say, look, if you want us to provide or establish this acceptance, you have to allow us to build acceptance. Acceptance is not an event, as I said, it's a process. So it won't happen in just one day. So we need to also, we ourselves, the agencies, need to beg for more patience with some of the donors. We need to explain that we cannot absorb all the money immediately in these very high and volatile contexts. That also the rush of the money sometimes contributes to us being very careless about the relations that we build and how we move sometimes too quickly and without having done the homework into these situations. So there's a lot to be done on that front. Now, perhaps just to finish, and obviously, sorry, before I come to my conclusions, the situations that we've been looking at in the study are broadly around four types. It's deliberate and targeted attacks against humanitarians. I mean, environments where we've had those. Environments where we've witnessed increasing high levels of criminality and banditry. Where we have witnessed indiscriminate terrorist attacks, including against civilians also in densely populated areas and so on. And then the fourth context is still that of active hostilities. Where we have active hostilities, what measures can we take and have we proven to take actually in those? And the situations that we're thinking of is those like we've had in Sri Lanka recently, or during the Lebanon 2006 war, Afghanistan, Iraq 2001 or 2003 respectively. So these are more or less the context we're looking at. And in terms of the main findings, perhaps just to quickly go over this, there is a lot of good practice actually out there, which goes from the deconflicting measures that we've taken in those contexts where we had ongoing active hostilities, meaning that we actually co-locate people with those armed forces in order to get information, operational, tactical information about movements of those armed forces or aerial bombardments, so that when there is a lull, we can actually deliver things. And that has worked impressively, I have to say, during the Afghanistan, Iraq, and Lebanon campaigns in 2001, 3, and 2006, and also in other contexts, has proven one of those practices. We have had a very interesting discussion about when to use insignia and when not, and the practice is actually very different. In some instances, the reassertion of UN humanitarian insignia has actually worked and led to a certain measure of security, for example, in Gaza, whereas in other instances, and in those much more political contexts that I mentioned before, there was a general perception out there that led many to actually not use insignia at all. We emphasize, the study will emphasize, or it's in its first draft form right now, so things may still change, but emphasizes the importance for humanitarians to engage with all parties to a conflict, meaning with all non-state armed groups. And the problem is, particularly for us, perhaps at the UN front, that some of those non-state armed groups are on either national or various international terrorism lists. They may or may not be considered terrorists, and there is quite some aversion towards sort of conceding that parts of this international community or parts of even the UN community would actually reach out and work with organizations that are by someone labeled as terrorist organizations. But what this argues for, the study, is if we want to create acceptance, if we want to create the conditions to deliver goods and aid to people, if we want to create conditions that are relatively more secure, we need to engage with all non-state armed groups. Obviously, there are probably limits, and one mustn't be naive about this. I don't think that anyone has the idea that you go to some Al-Qaeda headquarters somewhere in Tora Bora or whatever and sit down with these people and say, please don't target us. But the field from Taliban, Hezbollah, Hamas and so on is very wide, and the arguments here are we need to be building conditions for delivery even with those. I mentioned acceptance as the entry point, and a clear statement that security and other measures are complementing acceptance rather than the other way around. Another key finding is don't leave. Don't let your communications disrupt. There's a clear advantage in terms of security and acceptance of those organizations who actually stayed even during critical periods. I'm not sure, there are probably ICRC people in the room, so I don't want to talk about ICRC interna, but even the ICRC referred to contexts where they actually had pulled people back and described very impressively how difficult it was for them to re-establish those contacts. Once you leave, once you pull out, that's a vote of no confidence. It's really difficult. It takes a long time to re-establish community and other even more political contacts that are necessary to build that trust and ultimately security conditions. It's a very important thing, and where you have to pull back or regroup temporarily, at least continue the communications, keep the communication channels open, very important. And I mentioned the other point about expectations all around, particularly in those very political contexts. We all know that donors in the political environment very often is such that we're being rushed. You need to go back, you need to establish this, and we very often are not good enough in saying, but if we do this, we'll do damage to the sustainability of our operations, or to our acceptance, to our trust building, and ultimately endanger our people. We've got to learn from those who have done this very well over the years, including the Red Cross and Red Crescent movements, that in order to get a sustainable operation off the ground, you have to invest also time, and that argues for some expectation management. These are some of the things, just to mention perhaps, that our study will come out probably in February. And as I said, the advisory group that I mentioned, which also has several NGO representatives, like the Vice President of MSF France and the representative from the NGO consortia for Iraq. I mean, the advisory group will stay together and continue sort of accompanying the rollout of the study, which includes having some of those discussions with our political and security colleagues. So in closing, just to say, we not only completely agree with the importance of your study and many of the findings, or most of the findings. We will also use your study and your work to support and bolster our approach next year and in the coming years in changing a little bit the approach to delivering humanitarian assistance, or to the acceptance of humanitarians delivering their assistance differently from the mainstream of the rest of the humanitarian community. And the initial signs, I have to say, from our Department for Safety and Security, DSS, are very encouraging. There is a shift. There is a shift from risk aversion to enabling these operations. There's still quite a way to go, and that way also entails, as they would readily say, that we need to look at the people who actually do security then in the field. The quality of the security advisors needs to be such that they do not only look at the risk, the security risk, but also at the cost of not delivering, at the purpose of the programmatic delivery. And the Department of DSS is working on retraining and a completely new pool of people who would have that broader perspective. And lastly, to say one of the key, or the two key features in this new security system is, number one, that one wouldn't look at a country anymore as just one monolithic block, but there may be 6, 9, 12 different security areas, but you will also, that will involve some cost. You will also, in order to operate the system, you will have to have analysts and people who know the situation and can communicate the risks back at all these 6, 9, or 12 stations. And lastly, the system about phases from 1 to 5 that have held back so many of us is, as of the 1st of January 2011, no longer in place, and will be replaced by a system that is centered around a security risk assessment that simply looks at the hazards that are out there, evaluates them, and says, you know, on a scale from 0 to 4, the combination, the analysis of all the hazards that may actually occur in an area, and that may also involve frequent natural disasters or something, as we saw in Haiti. Many of our peacekeepers got killed because the building was built right on the fault line. So all these hazards will be taken into this analysis, and the rate, or the coefficient that comes out of this is just guidance for the country team to then take a decision on how to deal with that security situation, or those security hazards. So there will be no more mechanical boxing into security phases with certain consequences of operations or non-operations, and I think that will help the whole enabling approach of the United Nations security system, and will be very, very complementing, I think, of this acceptance approach that or the return to the acceptance approach that we are trying to promote. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's certainly enlightening to hear that the discussions that we've had with the GPR8 also fall through into discussions that you're having with the group who are writing the paper for you, but also, more importantly, with the wider community. I think any discussion that enables us to talk further about the restrictions that we've put into place through our policies, or the ways in which we can make our practices and procedures adapt more to our mission and mandate, is certainly a good discussion to have. So thank you very much.